comes to an end. I hope that every single one of you are doing absolutely fantastic today. If you are new to the channel, welcome, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of the parts of this reading series. I will continue to try to read it as long as I do not get any copyright like warnings or anything like that. I know reading can be kind of difficult on YouTube just because of any potential copyright stuff. So I just want to say I do not own any of the work here. obviously sensed danger too, because she said quickly, "And we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, Pumpkin? 2 more presents, is that alright?" Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. He finally said slowly, "So I'll have 39 sweetums," said Aunt Petunia. "Oh." Dudley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. "Alright then." Uncle Vernon chuckled. "Little Tyke wants his money's worth just like his father had a boy, Dudley." He ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went to answer it while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, a cine camera, a remote control airplane, 16 new computer games, and a video recorder. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone, looking both angry and worried. "Bad news, Vernon," she said. "Mrs. Figg's broken her leg. She can't take him." She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day to adventure parks, hamburger bars, or the cinema. Every year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. Figg, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. I'm so glad I'm done with this page. Oh my gosh, I can't turn it fast enough. Don't like it. There we go. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Mrs. Figg made him look at photographs of all the cats she had ever owned. "Now what?" said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry as though he'd planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Figg had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he had to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tuffy again. "We could phone Marge," Uncle Vernon suggested. "Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy." The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he had been something very nasty that couldn't understand them, like a slug. "What about what's her name, your friend Yvonne, on holiday in Majorca?" snapped Aunt Petunia. "You could just leave me here." Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on television for a change, and maybe even go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she had swallowed a lemon and come back to find the house in ruins. She snarled. "I won't blow up the house," said Harry, but they weren't listening. "I suppose we could take him to the zoo," said Aunt Petunia slowly, "and leave him in the car. That car's new. He's not sitting in it alone." Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he really wasn't crying. It had been years since he'd really cried, but he knew that if he screwed his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. "Dinky Duddy Bums, don't cry. Mummy won't let him spoil your special day," she cried, flinging her arms around him. "I don't want him to come," Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs. "He always spoils everything." He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then, the doorbell rang. "Oh, good Lord, they're here," said Aunt Petunia frantically, and a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hid them. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Piers and Dudley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him, but before they left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. "I'm warning you," he had said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's. "I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas." "I'm not going to do anything," said Harry honestly. But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happen. Once Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back into the barber's looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald, except for his fringe, which he had left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who had spent a sleepless night as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door in his cupboard, was jump behind the big bins outside the kitchen doors. It must have been the wind. Must have caught him in mid-jump. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Pierce to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school. His cupboard or Mrs. Fig's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things, people at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects this morning. It was motorbikes. Roaring along like maniacs, the young hoodlums, he said as a motorbike overtook them. I had a dream about a motorbike, said Harry, remembering suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vernon nearly crashed the car in front. He turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beetroot with a mustache. Motorbikes don't fly. Dudley and Pierce snickered. I know they don't, said Harry. It was only a dream. But he had wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing that Ursula's hated even more than him is asking questions, it was his talking about anything, acting in a way it shouldn't, no matter if it was a dream or even a cartoon. They didn't. They seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys bought Dudley and Pierce large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon ice lolly. It wasn't bad either, Harry thought, licking it as they watched a gorilla scratching his head and looking remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. Harry had the best morning he'd had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little way apart from the Dursleys so that Dudley and Pierce, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, wouldn't fall back on their favorite hobby of hitting him. They ate in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his I don't even know, whatever, it wasn't big enough, Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was all too good to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Pierce wanted to see the huge poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into a dustbin. But at the moment it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. Make it move, he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't bulge. Do it again, Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon rapped the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake was just snoozed on. This is boring, Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself, no company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass, trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where his only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. But at least he got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes, slowly, very slowly. It raised its head until its eyes were on the level of Harry's. It winked. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around to see if anyone was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head towards Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised his eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that quite plainly said, I get that all the time. I know, Harry murmured through the glass, though it wasn't sure the snake could hear him. It must be really annoying. The snake nodded vigorously. Where do you come from, anyway? Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at the little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. Boa constrictor. Brazil. Was first time.